I still remember the moment with vivid clarity, sitting across from a close friend who looked at me with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Why do you always seem so guarded?" he asked quietly, folding his hands across the table as if bracing himself for my answer. It was one of those questions that hits you unexpectedly, not because it's harsh or judgmental, but because it peels back something you'd rather not confront. I thought about it for a long time. Why was I so cautious, so careful with every word, every gesture? Why did I spend so much energy trying to predict how others might react, often holding back parts of myself to avoid stirring discomfort or criticism? That question stayed with me, growing heavier each time I caught myself shrinking, adjusting, or softening my opinions to avoid any ripple of judgment. It wasn't about vanity or fear of rejection alone. It felt deeper, like an invisible current tugging at my confidence and vitality in ways I hadn't fully recognized. At first, I blamed the chaotic world outside, the pressures of work, strained relationships, a culture obsessed with appearances. But gradually, I began to sense something else, something residing quietly within me, shaping my every move even when I wasn't consciously aware of it. There was this whisper beneath all my actions, this subtle but relentless force that pushed me to measure my words and my presence against some invisible standard. It wasn't just about avoiding actual judgment. It was the anticipation of it, like a shadow looming just beyond my vision, ready to pounce the moment I stepped out too far or showed too much. I realized this anticipation wasn't just mental chatter. It ran deep in my body, influencing how I carried myself even in moments of solitude. One afternoon, stuck in traffic during a long golden hour commute home, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. The eyes staring back seemed tired, almost resigned, like they'd been carrying a weight for far too long. I noticed my shoulders had curled inward again, my breath shallow and tight. It struck me how my physical presence mirrored my inner tension, like my body was bracing for a threat that might never come, conserving energy to fight battles that existed more in my mind than in reality. The strangest part? This wasn't about a single instance or one bad experience. It was a pattern woven into my daily life, a subtle dance of overstretched effort to fit in, to avoid conflict, to keep the peace. I was constantly steering away from any chance of being too much or not enough, delicately balancing on a tightrope of approval I hadn't even consciously agreed to walk. And each time I stepped back, each time I dimmed my light, something inside me receded just a little more. Yet, as exhausting as this quiet vigilance was, I realized I wasn't alone. So many of the men I knew, friends, colleagues, strangers I met in fleeting moments, carried the same invisible burden. We masked it with jokes, distractions, busy schedules, and the illusion of control. But under the surface, there was this silent cost, this surrender of presence and authenticity in pursuit of an ever-shifting approval. It made me wonder how much of what we call strength or energy is actually sapped before it even has a chance to ignite. If so much of our inner power is being quietly drained by this unspoken fear, what does it mean for the lives we want to lead? How different could things feel if that underlying tension began to loosen its grip, if our bodies and minds stopped preparing for battles that haven't yet occurred? These questions became my quiet companions on a journey I still find unfolding every day. I began to pay attention not just to my thoughts but to my posture, my breathing, the way I responded to social situations silently shaped by that lurking anticipation. I noticed how the possibility of judgment could stir a tightness in my chest, slow my step, or shrink my voice. And the more I observed, the clearer it became that the true challenge wasn't always out there in the world but deeply embedded within. A delicate, powerful web of thoughts and feelings guiding my biology and my behavior without me even realizing. This awareness was both unsettling and strangely freeing. It wasn't about blaming myself or others, but about acknowledging a hidden truth that had taken up more space in my life than I was willing to admit. And with that acknowledgement came a faint, but growing hope. What if this uncertainty, this fear, didn't have to define the way I moved through the world? What if there was a way to reclaim a sense of ease, presence, and authenticity that didn't depend on constant adaptation or approval? I invite you to join me here, Not because the path is easy or because we have all the answers yet, but because something in you knows what it means to feel held back by invisible chains. Something in you longs to breathe freely, to stand tall, to live with steadiness and clarity no matter what eyes might be watching. As we explore this together, we'll begin uncovering the quiet dynamics that shape our energy, our confidence, our very presence, often without us even knowing. And with that understanding, there lies the possibility to reclaim the power waiting beneath, ready to rise when we least expect it. So take a moment now and look inward. What subtle ways do you find yourself shrinking or softening around others? What moments carry the weight of unseen judgment so heavily it colors your entire day? You're not alone. And this is where our journey starts. Right here, in this shared space of discovery, courage, and transformation. When I reflect on moments where I unconsciously shrink back, it's often sparked not by overt criticism, but by the mere whisper of potential disapproval lurking beneath the surface. I recall one evening during a work gathering, surrounded by colleagues I respected but didn't feel fully known by, when a topic came up that ignited a fire within me. Normally, I would have spoken boldly, articulating my thoughts without hesitation. Yet, that night, my voice faltered, drowning beneath a steady stream of internal doubts. I found myself trimming my sentences, nodding in agreement instead of challenging perspectives. It was as if an invisible force reined me in, compelling me to blend in rather than stand out. Conversations like that tend to leave a subtle imprint on my muscles, the way my shoulders involuntarily slump or my jaw tightens in moments when I hold back. What fascinates me is that restraint doesn't feel like weakness, but instead a biological response wired into my nervous system. My body learns, through repeated micro-adjustments, that stepping fully into my truth, even when it sparks discord, is a risk far too great. Over time, these silent, almost imperceptible contractions ripple through my sense of self, dimming the vibrancy I once carried without thought. I started noticing how this dynamic played out beyond social settings. During a morning jog, when my mind was unburdened by others' expectations, I sensed something different. A natural rhythm of expansive breath, steady footing, and alertness that contrasted with the evening's sluggish withdrawal. This tug between contraction and expansion felt like an internal climate shift, fueled not by external judgments but by an undercurrent of imagined threats. It's fascinating how anticipation can simulate danger, activating our survival instincts, even when the environment around us offers safety. One afternoon, I spoke with a mentor about this nuanced interplay between perception and physiological response. He shared an insight that struck a chord, that our bodies don't just react to events but to forecasts we construct, scenarios we rehearse in our minds that paint the unknown as perilous. In this framework, the energy I lose isn't just from external resistance but largely from rehearsing fear. For example, when I obsess over what others might think before I even utter a word, I engage a full-blown biological alarm system, depleting my stamina in advance. It's like sprinting a marathon before the starting gun fires. This revelation challenged me to examine the habitual stories running beneath my confident veneer. I realized that beneath courteous smiles or seemingly calm facades, a dense web of assumptions about others' judgments quietly orchestrates my behaviors. These assumptions don't necessarily emerge from recent encounters but often echo from past experiences where vulnerability led to rejection or misunderstanding. Such echoes amplify with repetition, creating a nervous system primed for contraction rather than openness. When I think about this through the lens of masculine energy, the implications deepen. Societal conditioning has trained many of us to associate strength with control and emotional suppression. Yet, in moments driven by the dread of being evaluated, my body's default instinct counters that with withdrawal, discouraging the very steady presence I aspire to embody. I find myself caught between the expectation to assert myself and the biologically ingrained pull to conserve resources by pulling away. This internal conflict plays out not just in isolated incidents but as a pervasive current shaping my posture, tone, and even decisions. In a more personal setting, I recall a delicate conversation with someone I trusted deeply. I wanted to express a disagreement, an alternative perspective rooted in my values. Despite the intimacy of our connection, the fear of unsettling the harmony gripped me tightly. I hesitated, then watered down my viewpoint, folding it into a softer narrative that prioritized acceptance over honesty. Afterwards, a sort of quiet exhaustion settled in. Reflecting on it later, I realized this emotional fatigue wasn't caused by actual discord, but emerged from denying my own impulses, conceding vitality to maintain a fragile equilibrium. What's remarkable is how this pattern extends beyond language or expression and infiltrates even our physical boundaries. The moment I tweak my body to appear less imposing or adjust my smile to conform, I send signals to my brain that expansion equals danger. In essence, my physiology begins to interpret self-expression as a liability to be managed rather than a right to be claimed. It underscores a profound truth. The tension is less about external judgment and more about internalized threat perceptions, encoded deeply within our systems. Now, consider how this applies when you face situations that demand you lean into discomfort. Maybe it's voicing an unpopular opinion in a meeting, or choosing a path that deviates from familiar norms. That flicker of hesitation, that subtle pull to retreat, is your biology preparing to defend against risk, not a measure of your worth or capability. Recognizing this allows us to separate biological instinct from conscious choice, opening space to respond differently. Navigating this terrain requires curiosity and patience. By observing how our bodies respond unbidden, recognizing the tightening in the chest, the urge to withdraw, the quickening thoughts racing ahead, we begin to unravel these automatic defenses. We discover that beneath the armor lies a capacity for resilience that can flourish when given permission. With practice, moments once dominated by anxiety transform into opportunities for embodiment, where the steady pulse of self-trust outruns the noise of expectation. Through experiences layered with trial and reflection, I'm learning to honor these physiological signals not as adversaries but as messengers. They reveal where past wounds cluster, where boundaries have blurred, and where bravery waits to be claimed. This evolving dialogue between mind, body, and environment uncovers why so much masculine energy ebbs, not from external forces alone, but from the ceaseless rehearsal of judgment unanswered yet feared. In this light, reclaiming energy becomes an act of rewriting our inner scripts, a commitment to step into spaces previously avoided, not as blind courage, but as informed presence. It's about shifting how we engage with both the imagined and real, embracing discomfort without surrendering to it. With every subtle recalibration, there's room to cultivate steadiness that radiates from within, breaking free from the invisible chains forged by anticipation rather than reality. I remember a particular evening when I found myself at a dinner with people I barely knew, feeling the heavy pull of unspoken expectations. The conversation flowed effortlessly around me, but I caught myself suppressing a story that was burning on the tip of my tongue. Instead of sharing the raw, vivid experience of a recent challenge, I opted for a sanitized version, safe, agreeable, non-threatening. What surprised me afterward was neither regret nor embarrassment, but a dull ache deep in my chest, as if I'd traded a part of my living essence for social comfort. That discomfort lingered, prompting me to question why I gave in so easily to that internal pressure to self-censor. It dawned on me that this process was far subtler than blatant fear. It resembled an internal script written long ago, directing me to avoid waves in a sea that demanded calm surfaces. The cost didn't register in pounds or dollars, but in an erosion of my personal sovereignty, a gradual shrinking of my presence without anyone having to utter a critical word. That invisible edit inside my mind shaped my posture, my tone, and even the cadence of my laughter. It was as if my inner compass had been reset to prioritize harmony over authenticity, taming my natural assertiveness into silence. One afternoon, while walking through the city's crowded streets, I noticed a pattern emerging in how I navigated human interaction. Faces blurred together, and yet a constant vigilance hummed quietly beneath my skin, attuned to the slightest sign of disapproval. A furrowed brow, a fleeting glance, a swallowed laugh. Suddenly, shifting weight from one foot to the other felt less like restlessness and more like a self-protective ritual, a way to lessen my footprint, to fade into the background consciously. I recognized that in these social corridors, I was training myself to anticipate judgment like a dangerous storm, adjusting my behavior to avoid any thunder. Reflecting on that, I realized an important layer. This preemptive adaptation operates as a feedback loop. The more often I retraced my steps to avoid potential ridicule or exclusion, the more ingrained this fallback mechanism became. My physiology not only stored these memories but anticipated future threats by defaulting to low-energy modes, quieter voices, smaller gestures, guarded smiles. Instead of relaxing into social engagement, I was subconsciously bracing for attack, exhausting reserves in rehearsals of defeat rather than celebrations of connection. What became clearer over time was how this inner choreography extended beyond social gatherings into the private realm of decision-making and ambition. For example, I encountered reluctance to pursue projects that felt risky, not because of a genuine lack of interest, but due to a forecasted judgment cascade that played in my mind. The mental dialogue sounded like a litany of concerns. Will they think it's foolish? Am I setting myself up to fail? Could I disappoint those who look up to me? These imagined verdicts, although unspoken, shaped tangible realities. Task avoidance, hesitation, creative blocks that silently recalibrated my sense of efficacy. Once I began to catch this recurring pattern, I tried an experiment grounded in mindfulness. During a routine work meeting, when an opportunity arose to voice a controversial opinion, I observed my impulses closely. The familiar tightening around my diaphragm and the racing thoughts warning me to stay quiet were undeniable. But instead of yielding, I acknowledged these reactions as guests rather than commandments. Speaking slowly and deliberately, I shared my perspective, noticing how the room's energy didn't shatter, but shifted with subtle curiosity. Afterward, an unexpected surge of vitality coursed through me, accompanied by a profound sense of reclaiming personal agency that was previously negotiated away unconsciously. Another encounter unveiled how powerful social roles can be in reinforcing this dynamic. Being cast, for example, as the peacemaker in family or group settings often pressures me toward excessive accommodation. The implicit expectation to smooth tensions silences my legitimate grievances, creating pressure valves that eventually build stress rather than release it. When I finally dared to express firm boundaries, I discovered that relationships can recalibrate in unexpected ways, sometimes strained momentarily but often maturing into mutual respect and deeper understanding. This experience taught me that perceived risks of judgment can obscure the liberating possibility of authentic connection. I recall an evening jog that transitioned from mechanical exercise into a metaphor for a larger internal shift. Typically, my steps were stiff and cautious, my breathing sporadic as my mind wrestled with anxieties clutching at the future. That day, a sudden embrace of vulnerability emerged when I caught sight of a stranger jogging alongside me, their steady pace inviting silent camaraderie. Without exchanging words, a bond formed through shared motion, a non-judgmental witnessing that momentarily freed me from layers of self-monitoring. In that rhythm of unguarded movement, my body revealed how much strength could return when the anticipation of critique dissipated and presence deepened. These episodes narrate a potent truth. The anticipation of criticism often wields more influence than its actual arrival. When the body and mind dwell in scenarios rehearsed but unrealized, energy is siphoned away from growth and redirected towards self-preservation. However, every small act of resisting these trained responses carves new neural pathways, reinforcing courage and expanding the capacity to inhabit space fully. This delicate, gradual process unfolds beneath conscious awareness, but it accumulates meaningfully over time, fostering a robust internal climate receptive to authenticity rather than guardedness. I once found myself standing at the edge of a crowded conference room, heart pounding as the spotlight shifted toward me. An intense urge to recoil tried to pull me back, tightening like a vice around my chest. Instead of stepping forward confidently, I hesitated, stalled by an invisible barrier that whispered warnings from deep within. The moment cracked, fragile and raw, as if the very act of being seen threatened to unravel the carefully woven fabric of my self-possession. Yet, beneath that trembling surface, a spark flickered, a quiet defiance that beckoned me to move beyond the limiting shadow cast by silent judgment. In that instant, I sensed a profound disconnect between my internal landscape and the external world. My body seemed to rebel against the instinct to contract, yearning instead for release, for expansion. It was as if layers of tension accumulated over years had anchored me in a constant, low-grade defensive stance, unrelenting and exhausting. This muscle memory, written deep into my nervous system, was less about actual danger and more an echo chamber replaying scenarios no longer relevant but stubborn in their claim on my energy. The paradox was clear. My biology sought preservation through shrinking, yet this very retreat diminished the vitality I craved. Navigating social landscapes often mirrors walking a tightrope stretched between self-expression and self-protection. I recall a late-night conversation with a friend, where vulnerability dangled precariously in the air. I wanted to share my insecurities openly, to admit the battles waged beneath the surface. However, an instinctive shield formed, cloaking my words in guarded phrases. The fear of unsettling fragile connections, or worse, being dismissed, held sway, casting a chill over my willingness to risk authenticity. That night unveiled a subtle cost. The erosion of intimacy not due to rejection, but because the pretense of safety demanded silence. Diving deeper, I recognized how social conditioning crafts a cage of subtle compromises. The countless small yes offered to avoid discord accumulate quietly, morphing into an invisible prison that restricts movement toward true selfhood. Each concession, seemingly insignificant on its own, chips away at inner resolve, teaching the body that standing firm equates with threat. This biological calculus favors economy. It conserves resources for battles deemed necessary. Consequently, habitual avoidance becomes a learned default, pressing down with invisible weight that clouds decision-making and dims emotional aliveness. I started tracking these patterns more deliberately, noticing the crossroads where I faced choices laced with potential judgment. At times, even voicing an unpopular opinion in a simple exchange felt like stepping into an arena. My muscles tensed, pulse quickened, breath shortened, as if preparing for conflict. Yet when I consciously allowed myself to stand my ground, a surprising release surged through me, shaking loose years of accumulated tension. It felt like untangling thorny vines wrapped tightly around my core, revealing spaces where energy could flow freely again. During a weekend hike alone, immersed in a vast wilderness untouched by human presence, my relationship with vulnerability took on new meaning. Without watchful eyes to monitor, I felt a gradual unspooling, as if the dense armor forged by habitual caution softened beneath the sun and wind. My steps grew lighter, breath deeper, as if the natural world silently consented to my unfolding. This solitude offered a poignant contrast. No judgments demanded, no projections awaited. Only raw reality mirrored back through sky and stone. It dawned on me that real liberation begins not with others' approval but with the permission we grant ourselves to occupy space fully. Moving forward, I made deliberate choices to confront moments carrying the weight of possible evaluation. In a team meeting focused on brainstorming, I resisted the impulse to mute my ideas out of concern for how they might be received. Though my suggestions initially met with silence, a few sparked curiosity and even enthusiasm. More importantly, I sensed a shift in my internal posture, shaped less by fear, more by willingness to risk discomfort. This recalibration, though fragile, sowed seeds of confidence that, nurtured patiently, could grow into steadfast groundedness. I remember the feeling vividly after one such encounter, an intoxicating blend of exhilaration and gravity, as if stepping onto solid ground after years of walking on shifting sand. That embodied certainty carried through the days that followed, infusing my voice with depth and presence. It reminded me that the path toward reclaiming inner strength is uneven, marked by moments of resistance as well as breakthroughs, each vital in reshaping how we move in the world. At times, I still encounter the magnetic pull to shrink, especially when old stories whisper that expansion invites rejection. Yet, increasingly, I recognize these impulses as invitations instead, calls to practice courage in everyday acts, to engage with discomfort as a teacher, not an adversary. Through these struggles, I'm learning that genuine power emerges not from the absence of judgment but from embracing it as a transient shadow that passes, never defining the essence beneath. Now, consider what shifts might arise if you allowed your body to recall freedom instead of restriction. Imagine nurturing spaces where authenticity blooms unharried by the specter of dissent. In that unfolding, the masculine energy long subdued begins to flow anew, steady, vibrant, unyielding in its quiet confidence. The journey demands patience and resilience, but within it lies a transformative promise: to inhabit your fullness unapologetically, enlivened by the very presence that fear once sought to diminish. Reflecting on this journey so far, I find myself standing at a crossroads where countless threads, though unseen individually, begin to intertwine into a tapestry both complex and vital. It's as if each subtle hesitation, every habit formed from shadows of unspoken fears, has created a landscape inside me that isn't fixed but malleable, a terrain shaped by unseen currents pulling me away from my own full presence. I realize that this isn't merely about moments of choice or the masks donned in public. It extends deeper, settling into the contours of my very being, quietly guiding how I carry myself, breathe, and engage with the world around. There's a peculiar tension in this awareness, a sort of internal tug-of-war where one part of me seeks safe harbor in familiar patterns, while another whispers of uncharted waters rich with possibility. It reminds me of a vessel at sea, buffeted by waves generated by storms that may never reach the shore, yet its hull tightens and shudders as if bracing against inevitable crashing surf. The challenge lies not just in enduring the imagined tempests, but in learning to trust the calm beneath. Awakened currents of strength that invite expansion even when the skies remain gray. It feels intimately personal, yet I know this experience stretches beyond my solitary frame. There is a shared rhythm pulsing in this silent choreography, the give and take between self-protection and vulnerability, between holding back and stepping forth. I sense the quiet perseverance embedded in these rhythms, a resilience that quietly accumulates amidst episodes of doubt and withdrawal. The body, after all, is not just an observer but an active participant, weaving memory and emotion into an intricate dance that informs every gesture, every breath I take. What becomes clear is that this dynamic is not static. It ebbs and flows, uplifted or withheld by our choices and awareness. The invisible narrative written beneath conscious thought can either bind me in invisible chains or loosen them, inviting freedom to blossom in places once constricted. This transformation, subtle yet profound, stitches together courage not born from grand declarations but from countless small acts of standing my ground, of acknowledging discomfort without surrendering to it. I remember reaching into a quiet well within, feeling it fill not with emptiness but with the murmur of potential. In these moments, time seems to stretch, a space where fear's loud voice dims, replaced by a steady pulse that anchors me amid swirling doubts. It's like stepping onto a precipice not to fall but to see beyond, to peer into a horizon where the self is not necessarily harder or louder but more authentically aligned, grounded not in external acknowledgement but in inner steadiness that neither flees nor fumes. Listening closely to my own internal dialogue, I find there are invitations woven into the fabric of resistance. Even as my instincts lean toward contraction, they also signal where the most vital growth waits. What may initially feel like vulnerability holds the keys to deeper connection and genuine presence. The interplay between restraint and release reveals itself not as a battle to be won, but as a rhythm to be learned. An evolving dance between safety and expression, where mastery lies in embracing the tension without allowing it to consume. This dance unfolds in the spaces between words left unspoken and the clarity shimmering beneath hesitation. It resides in the delicate gestures that balance assertion with empathy, in the moments when I feel tired yet recognize an unfamiliar surge of possibility flickering within. Each step taken on this path, no matter how tentative, breaches the boundaries set by concern for others' perceptions and yields new capacity to inhabit my fullness without apology. As I walk this evolving landscape, I find a quiet kind of awakening stirring, a recognition that vitality once obscured by shadows hidden deep within can reemerge, not by fighting what is or what might be but by shifting the lens through which I perceive both myself and the world. The tension begins to soften, the internal posture to unfold, and an unfamiliar clarity edges closer. It is neither a destination nor a fixed point but a horizon that beckons with the promise of a different kind of presence. Steady, open, and unapologetically alive. There was a time when I believed that holding back was a necessary shield, an unspoken pact I made with myself to stay safe, to avoid the sting of scrutiny that felt like a threat to my very core. I convinced myself this cautious restraint was wisdom, a man's measured response to social currents too harsh to confront directly. But as I sit here now, tracing the contours of that old defense, I realize it was something else altogether. A slow dimming of my own beacon, a surrender to shadows cast by imagined verdicts. I remember the restlessness I felt quietly accumulating inside, like a storm brewing far off the coast. A turbulence I couldn't see clearly but could sense unwaveringly. My body learned to tighten in expectation of judgment, folding inward like a protective seed that refuses to bloom out of fear of frost. And yet, ironically, it was this very withdrawal that chilled my vitality, shrinking the fertile ground where confidence and presence might have flourished. There is a peculiar irony in this dance of contraction and expansion. Each step back taken to avoid invisible critiques simultaneously stunts the very energy needed to stand tall. Our physiology responds most intensely to anticipated threats, which often carry more weight in our nervous systems than tangible challenges. It's a paradox born from ancient survival strategies, wired deeply into our design, prompting economy of movement and reserve of strength when perceived social risk rises. But in today's complexities, these biological strategies can trap us in cycles of quiet retreat rather than authentic engagement. I came to understand that releasing these patterns isn't a matter of forcing courage or bulldozing through fears with brute willpower. Instead, it's a delicate process woven from patience and self-compassion, a willingness to learn the language of my own subtle signals and rewrite the narratives handed down by habitual thoughts. This soft courage calls me to recognize and honor the slow, often imperceptible shifts that open space for honest expression and unguarded presence. It dawns on me that this surrender to vulnerability opens doors to profound strength. True masculinity, in this awakening, isn't about armor forged from self-protection, but about a grounded steadiness born of knowing and owning oneself unconditionally. It's in the moments when I face uncertainty without flinching, when I allow my authentic voice to rise without filtering it through fears of outside approval. Here, energy flows uninhibited and clarity sharpens, reshaping my posture from a habit of concealment to one of confident embodiment. This transformation carries a ripple effect. It reshapes how I inhabit relationships, projects, and opportunities. When I am less tethered to the imagined responses of others, my presence commands respect naturally, because it is unshaken by external judgment. I no longer expend precious reserves anticipating disapproval that may never come. Instead, I invest fully in each interaction, rooted in the knowledge that I am enough without need for constant adaptation. Looking back, I see now that the chains I once felt were forged mostly from whispers of doubt and rehearsed fears. These shadows, while powerful, lose their grip when met with curiosity and intention. In essence, freeing myself from the heavy cost of anticipated judgment has become a radical act of self-love, a reclamation of raw vitality that invites me to show up unapologetically. I sense this invitation is universal, though uniquely lived by each of us. We all carry these hidden negotiations, sometimes cloaked in politeness, sometimes masked by ambition, that shape how wide we breathe, how boldly we walk, and how deeply we engage. To move beyond these confines means not erasing vulnerability but infusing it with trust that expansion is safe. It means daring to occupy space fully, reclaimed from those old places where fear once held dominion. So as I continue this journey, I hold close the quiet certainty that true power is born in the willingness to risk being seen as we truly are, imperfect, evolving, fierce, and open. The energy that flows from this acceptance is alive, magnetic, and immovable, not because we suppress judgment around us, but because we no longer allow it to dictate how brightly we shine. This clarity feels like standing in sunlight after a long winter, warmed by the freedom found in embracing our whole selves without apology. Perhaps this is the deepest challenge and greatest gift, in learning to trust ourselves enough to step beyond the familiar safety of retreat and into the boundless vitality waiting when we choose presence over pretense. It's a call that echoes quietly, yet persistently, inviting us all to reclaim the strength that was never lost, only waiting patiently for us to remember it belongs to us by birthright. And so I move forward, not escaping the risk but embodying the courage summoned from within, knowing that in this brave coming forth, life itself awakens anew.